Football, the planet's most loved sport. But for all its beauty, camaraderie and joy, some of its hardcore fans have a pretty bad rep for violence, bigotry and hooliganism. Ultras, casuals, hooligans. The definitions change depending on where you are in the world, but they're all seen as the most devoted, fanatical followers of their club. They're often highly organised, following their teams around the world to show support, and occasionally to stage hyper-violent, pitched battles with rival hooligan firms. This kind of impassioned, near-religious support is really seen outside football, except in one place: politics. This is how, from London to Belgrade to Jerusalem, right-wing movements and political parties have attempted to co-opt the testosterone-charged energy of the football terraces and turn it into a ready-made weapon to silence opponents. My name's Tim Hume, and I cover the far right for Vice World News. It goes without saying that the majority of football fans aren't hooligans, but far-right infiltration of football is a long-running problem. It has its roots in the earliest days of hooliganism in the UK of the 70s, where organisations like the National Front would deliberately try to recruit new members from football terraces and the pubs that surround them.
When I was a teenager and I was on the terraces, you would see the National Front there, you would see them trying to recruit, they would have their leaflets and so on.
Join the National Front!
But the crossover between football and extreme nationalism reached one of its most violent expressions during the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Željko Ražnatović was a seasoned criminal and worked as a security guard for the players and coaching staff at the Serbian club Red Star Belgrade. When war broke out in the early 90s, he formed a paramilitary group called the Serbian Volunteer Guard, or SDG, and recruited from the Dalje, Red Star's hardcore supporters group. Ražnatović was nicknamed Arkan, and the SDG became known as Arkan's Tigers. The Tigers were involved in massacring large numbers of Croatian and Muslim civilians.
They're closely involved in ethnic cleansing operations. Basically what we see is the Tigers being used as a force to perform the dirty work of the Belgrade regime.
But the links between football hooligans and politics didn't stop in the 90s.
So in contemporary Serbia, we see close relations between the ultras and organised politics, allegations that they're instructed to do things that will aid the political landscape.
And it's not just in the Balkans where we see a crossover between football violence and nationalist politics. This volatile manifestation has also reared its head in Israel. In 2020, as anti-government protests kicked off across Israel, it looked like then-President Benjamin Netanyahu's grip on power was loosening. But as the unrest took hold, a group of men stepped in to defend the government, beating up protesters, hijacking demos, and at one point, hurling a Molotov cocktail at a Palestinian man. These men were from La Familia, a far-right hooligan group affiliated to Beitar Jerusalem, who just happened to be Netanyahu's favourite club.
Beitar Jerusalem is basically the sporting branch of the Likud party, and it's been like that for many years. La Familia was always part of a political movement.
The connection between Beitar Jerusalem and right-wing Israeli politics goes back decades and will likely continue into the future.
La Familia connections are useful for politicians. They are a branch who can do some dirty work for you, who can intimidate protesters against you.
This use of hardcore fans as political muscle has been seen throughout Europe, from Ukraine, where nationalist militias recruited from hooligan firms during the war in Donbass, to Poland, where ultra-nationalist hooligans have mobilized against progressive, anti-government protesters. But given that most football fans have nothing to do with extremist politics, what is it about the hardcore end of football fandom that makes it a target for infiltration by far-right groups?
We ran a study in Brazil with a wide cohort of Brazilians, and we asked about their national identities, religious identities, and football identities. And we found the same psychological mechanism, this identity fusion, explaining the most extreme pro-group behaviour. So that's being willing to fight or die in the name of your group. And it was the same psychology, whether you were religious, a nationalist, or a football fan. And because that psychology is very similar, we can see why hardcore fan groups can often be a good pool to recruit membership for far-right groups and other extremist groups.
When football hooligans aren't engaging in street politics, they can usually be found fighting their fiercest club rivals in the stands, forests and MMA gyms. However, when international football matches come about, hooligan firms in the same country will often put aside their differences in the name of patriotism.
You've got a football identity and a national identity, both heavily invested. So when they come together, it's a really potent recipe for what we might call as passion. So in the case of hardcore fans or traditional hooligan groups, fans can come together for international matches, say, put aside their club level differences and come together for what they see as the greater good.
These dynamics took on a new form in the 2010s in the historic home of football hooliganism, the UK. But now, instead of established far-right groups targeting football ultras for recruitment or support, groups of football hooligans themselves formed their own far-right movements. These groups, like the English Defence League, brought separate and often rival firms together to advance a bigoted, Islamophobic agenda.
We know from research that has been done on the EDL, especially in the early days, at least 30 to 40% of activists came from football backgrounds.
And whilst the English Defence League wasn't just about football, what it did, it grew out of that seedbed that was provided by the football spaces.
The EDL initially claimed to be only opposed to militant Islam, but it quickly became apparent that their target was Islam in general and individual British Muslims in particular.
We know the enemy is within and no one's doing anything about it.
What really happened very quick was that there was that transition from Islamist extremism to Islam, and then all Muslims were actually presenting a threat to us, our way of life, our culture, our values.
And the Islamic community will feel the full force of the English Defence League if we see any of our citizens killed, maimed or hurt on British soil ever again.
At their height, the EDL were able to draw thousands onto the streets and even bigger numbers online. The movement replicated aspects of British fan culture that had been diluted by soaring ticket prices and more effective policing of games, helping to broaden its appeal.
Admittedly, what we get on the terraces is very different to what you get at an EDL march, for example, where it's much more Islamophobic. But the banners, the kind of the drinking together, the getting boozed up, the coked up stuff, all of these kind of things.
While the EDL fell apart amidst scandal and poor organisation, it inspired new movements such as the Football Lads Alliance a few years later, as well as similar groups in other European countries like the Hooligans against Salafist movement in Germany.
Heute schätzen sie scharfe Bünder, morgen vielleicht schon Christenkinder. Hooligans gegen Salafisten, wir wollen keinen Gottesstaat.
Despite those movements having collapsed, their poisonous legacy lives on.
10 years on from the EDL, when they first emerged, the real legacy that they've left really was the increasing normalisation of Islamophobia. Tommy Robinson was given a platform within the media to espouse this stuff. I think it resonated with an audience that was much bigger than the thousands of people that actually were on the street.
In recent years, the footballing community has become increasingly vocal in its rejection of racism. However, pockets of far-right fans remain a potent force in extremist street politics, mobilising to defend their political causes and attack their enemies.
The connections of La Familia and the Likud are not going to go away. When elections get nearer, they are political activists who will use whatever they have to create chaos and create problems for the current government.